Good evening and welcome to another Hangouts on Air. It's the first one we've had since the long summer break, and we've already been having a few technical issues with it, but hopefully it will be okay on the night. I'm Steve Pepper, I'm the host of this Hangouts on Air, or this webinar, and if I can introduce you to Patrick Mackey.
Hello, good evening. Nice to see you, Steve.
Yeah, if you'd like to tell people sort of who you are and a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm an EHO. I've been qualified since 1982, which is before most people around here were born, and I've done most things in my life. I'm currently working in Argyll and Bute, and all my views tonight are personal and not those of the council.
Right, that's fine, that's understood. So let's have a look and see if we can get this started. Rare burgers, fad or folly? So I'll play the video and see what happens.
What do unpasteurized milk and rare burgers have in common apart from the cow? They're both eaten uncooked, therefore any bacteria in the food won't be destroyed by heat and will present a risk to the health of the consumer. The risks from raw milk were so serious that it was one of the first applications of pasteurization. When pasteurization was made mandatory, the numbers of milk-related outbreaks of food poisoning and infant mortality plummeted. Raw milk was a food that killed. But people forget the past. They forget that thousands of people have died from drinking raw milk. And with the rise of foodie fashions and the desire to get back to natural food, whatever that is, ill-informed consumers are now seeking out unpasteurized milk for what are very marginal perceived benefits. Fortunately, here in Scotland, there's an absolute ban on placing raw milk on the market, even at the farm gate. And recently, we've seen the rise of the gourmet burger, artisan crafted from only the prettiest and most consenting cattle, treated with love and respect throughout the food chain, right up to the point the burger is slapped in a bun and you shove it in your face. Now, it's a wonderful thing that people are taking an interest in where their food comes from, because that can only help drive up standards of welfare and transparency in the food and farming industries. And we need the public to have a better understanding of the origins of their food and how animals in particular are treated on farm and up to the point of slaughter. However, food faddists are not content with just sourcing the best quality food. They want to do something that will distinguish their offer to the market from every other burger flipping Joe on the high street and appeal to the hipsters with money burning holes in their Apple Pay. And hence we see the rise of the rare burger because apparently it's nicer to eat. Believe me, I like my steak rare, once it's been seared on the outside. But rare burgers? Seriously? Haven't these people heard of E. coli 0157 or what happened to Mason Jones? Have they not learned the lessons of the John Barr outbreak in Wishaw, of the burger outbreak in Glasgow last year? Do they really want to be the next set of headlines and have to stand up in a coroner's court to explain themselves? Well, apparently they do. And apparently the Food Standards Agency is happy for them to do so, provided the consumer takes all the responsibility. So how did the Food Standards Agency get itself into such a fangle? It's actually a confusion between its own founding principles. Before the FSA was established, there was a government white paper which set out the guiding principles for the agency, which included: 1. The essential aim of the agency is the protection of public health in relation to food. 2. The agency's assessments of food standards and safety will be unbiased and based on the best available scientific advice. 3. The agency will make decisions and take action on the basis that action should be proportionate to the risk. They should pay due regard to costs as well as benefits to those affected by them and avoid overregulation. This paragraph from the white paper is highly relevant to the current issue. However, complete freedom from risk is an unattainable goal, and safety and wholesomeness are related to the level of risk that society regards as reasonable in the context of and in comparison with other risks in everyday life. In assessing and managing risks, the agency will need to take very careful account of the expectations of the consumer, recognizing that in many circumstances the public is unlikely to be willing to pay the cost of achieving the maximum theoretical level of safety, whether that cost is manifested in higher food prices or in restrictions on freedom of choice. The end result is that the FSA are inevitably going to be, to some extent, tossed about by the currents of food fashion, or what are referred to as the expectations of the consumer and freedom of choice. So let's examine the position the FSA arrived at on rare burgers. They say this: the long-standing advice to consumers that they should cook burgers thoroughly to kill any bugs that may be present is unchanged. However, businesses that are serving rare burgers, they should make sure that they have a range of controls in place. These include sourcing meat only from establishments which have specific controls in place to minimize the risk of contamination of meat intended to be eaten raw or lightly cooked, and providing consumer advice on menus regarding the additional risk from burgers which aren't thoroughly cooked. And businesses should provide prior notification to their local authority that they intend to serve rare burgers. Well, that's all well and good in the best of all possible worlds. But even in that ideal world, there will be E. coli in those rare burgers, and some of those victims will suffer irreparable kidney damage or be killed. But we don't live in a world where such stringent controls are going to be in place all the time, and where all food business operators will be so scrupulous as to follow those controls or even understand how the controls work. This isn't a snipe at caterers, but what is proposed is very complex, difficult, and time-consuming to validate and verify. And it's a bit of a giveaway that the FSA announced that they will be monitoring infection rates from rare burgers. Scotland are steering firmly on the side of the well-cooked burger. Approach are fivefold. 1. The controls are too complex, time-consuming and expensive to be confident that they can be maintained by everyone throughout the food chain. 2. The proposed controls do not eliminate the hazard of E. coli 0157, and there will not, by definition, be a thorough cooking step to destroy the bacteria by heat. 3. There are, unfortunately, enough fools and fraudsters out there who will have a go at getting away with serving rare burgers without all the controls in place. This policy gives a big, flashing green light to everyone who fancies themselves as a gourmet burger flipper to serve up undercooked burgers and get some of that hipster dough in their own pockets. 4. The message about cooking foods such as burgers and sausages all the way through is seriously diluted. 5. Finally, this approach effectively removes the protection of food safety law from the consumer and introduces a new rule of caveat emptor. Businesses will be able to rely upon their FSA-approved signage, at least until the third Pennington inquiry. Hugh Pennington, who knows more about the ecology of E. coli than anyone else in the UK, considers that the next outbreak of E. coli 0157 will be associated with this new fad. He has been quoted in EHN Online as saying that the only safe burgers are either thoroughly cooked or irradiated to kill bacteria. The controls the FSA suggest will reduce the risk if properly applied by careful and competent restaurateurs, but you can already count 3 assumptions in that sentence. Add to that the vast number of caterers who haven't got a clue what to do, won't read or follow the guidance, and just take it as carte blanche to sell rare burgers, and we've got a serious public health problem on our hands. As a reminder of what can happen, there was a recent news report of an outbreak of Shiga toxin producing E. coli burgers restaurant in Vermont, USA. There, the business proudly marketed their burgers as served pink in the middle. And guess what? 6 confirmed cases and 3 probable cases of E. coli food poisoning at the last count, and the last count was 2 days ago. The company's chief executive said, "Our customers are telling us what temperature they'd like their burgers." Vermont Department of Health's health surveillance epidemiologist had something else to say. "We want people to be cooking their meat to the appropriate temperature and checking that the meat has reached the appropriate temperature. People go on colour, we would encourage people not to do that. E. coli 0157 causes serious complications for people infected by it. At best, you're in for a nasty bout of bloody diarrhea. At worst, you're dead, or lucky just to have irreversible kidney failure. Price worth paying for a food fad? The decision by the Food Standards Agency not only to accept the service to the public of undercooked burgers, but also to promote practices which won't, in reality, protect the consumer is folly indeed. It also firmly establishes the extent to which the FSA, whose remit fortunately no longer runs in Scotland, has allowed political and populist expediency to undermine the independent scientific purposes for which it was supposed to be founded.
Is that the end of it, Patrick?
That's it. Yeah, that's the end of it.
Right, okay, let's just try and get this. No, it's not going to. Right, well, thank you very much. That was an excellent job. So I want to say thank you very much for coming up with that tonight. That's been very useful. It's just a shame that the time set on the broadcast was in GMT, and we're still on British summertime, of course, so we're an hour. And that's why we've missed out on one or two participants. David, for example, has been on, but he's had to go out, and Valerie came on, but we managed not to get Valerie there. So unfortunately, it's just thee and me, I'm afraid.
Well, that's a shame, but on the other hand, I know your Hangouts get a good view afterwards, and I will be posting that video and the text of the talk on my blog in about an hour's time. Incidentally, I also came across a blog review today of a restaurant in London that was serving very rare burgers, and I had a chat with the lady who wrote the review. She considers herself to be a bit of a gourmet, about her views about eating raw burgers, rare burgers, and she said this. It's an interesting point, and I look forward to reading your post on it. I think from my perspective as an average Joe consumer, I'm prepared to take the risk because I like the flavour and texture. I'm probably an idiot for saying and thinking that, but you could ask the same of why people smoke or drink alcohol. I'm sure that Honest Burgers, who are the company, wouldn't be putting people at risk as they're a well-established company, so you need to speak to them to get their take on it. Well, I'm doing exactly that. I've emailed Honest Burgers to see what they say about their policy of advising consumers before they're eating undercooked foods, because there's nothing on the website, Steve. No. And well, the other thing is they also have a kids menu, but they don't say anything about serving rare burgers to them, and I'd be very, very concerned if they did.
Yeah, I mean, for my sins, I'm on a lot of different Facebook groups, and I'm actually one of the moderators, or whatever they call them, for a chef's group, which has got 47,000 members on.
Wow.
So I've probably got about, on my blogs or webs or whatever, I'm probably getting in touch with some in the order of 70 or 80,000 chefs worldwide, who I listen to their concerns or otherwise about all sorts of undercooked things, including duck, pork, beef burgers, and even, believe it or not, undercooked rare chicken.
Yes, yes.
Now, for duck and poultry, chickens have been statistically proved to be contaminated with Campylobacter. Up to 60% of all chickens are contaminated.
Yep.
And 50% of all duck is contaminated with Campylobacter. And people just think, oh, well, you know, we don't get many cases of duck. And I think we've said this before on webinars, but it's proportionate because not as many people have duck. The USDA, Department of Agriculture in the US, they say that they will allow people to cook pork out to 63 degrees so it can be pink. But one of the problems, besides the trichinosis and the worm issue with pork, one of the other problems is the general pathogenic bacteria that are there. And also it's being linked now to hepatitis E, which requires a much higher temperature to kill it. So basically, these people who are cooking undercooked poultry, duck, or whatever, are putting people at serious risk. The chicken one, for example, as far as I'm aware, the infective Campylobacter is throughout the meat. It's that the bird themselves carry this organism. And the advice that one chef is giving to another is to dip it in boiling water for a couple of seconds, so it kills any bacteria on the outside. But of course, if the bacteria is throughout the meat, as was the case with salmonella, if the whole bird's infected, then it doesn't get rid of it. As far as I'm aware, the only safe way, besides irradiation, which wouldn't be allowed under our current legislation for raw or rare burgers, would be what they call sear and shave. And just as you said, if your steak is seared on the outside, you're quite happy to have it rare or medium rare, in my case. So if you get a piece of meat, say fillets, and cook the outside, sear it in the oven for 5 minutes, or even, I suppose, in a deep fat fryer, then what you do is you take the outside of that meat off and use it for something else and continue cooking it, leaving you with a solid joint of meat. Now, if you mince that into a burger and sear it both sides, right, you can have a rare burger. I mean, I wouldn't fancy it myself. I like medium rare steaks, but I just can't get my head around things like rare burgers, because it just goes so against the grain that subconsciously I'm very averse to them. So I don't know if you have any thoughts or comments on those points that I've raised.
Yeah, the sear and shave method was one that was derived, I think, initially in Westminster as I think it's a compromise process. But the problem is cross-contamination.
Yeah.
You actually require to have very strict hygiene indeed for comminuting meat using the sear and shave method. I've got the wrong teeth in tonight. Now, the problem here is that if you're producing something like steak tartare, then normally that is haché, that's cut with a knife. That's the usual method of preparation. If you're producing a burger, it's going through a piece of processing equipment, either a RoboCoupe or a mincer. Now, those are difficult to keep at a high level of disinfection throughout the course of an evening service or a lunch service. So I think there are major problems with maintaining the hygiene of that process, and I don't trust it. There is a way of producing a pink color burger which has had a reasonable heat treatment, and that's using a sous vide process. And the Advisory Committee on the Microbiological Safety of Food have produced some guidance about that. However, it's complex. It requires trained and skilled and knowledgeable food business operators to undertake it, and it probably won't cope with the varying demands of service from one day to another in busy restaurants. But there are techniques whereby this can be done with a reasonable degree of safety. I'm not convinced about sear and shave because the problems of contamination in the kitchen.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the thing is, it requires a great deal of understanding on behalf of the production staff as to what's acceptable, what's not. For example, there is now a recommendation under the last year's E. coli report to have separate equipment for raw and cooked. So if you've been putting normal mince through a mincer during the day for cottage pie or whatever, and then you sear and shave something on the night, unless that is absolutely sanitized, sterilized, whatever you call it, put through a dishwash, high temperatures, put through sanitizing rinse, then you're right, the equipment's going to be contaminated. And
I think, Steve, here's the test. You would effectively be treating this seared and shaved block of meat as ready to eat. But would you use the same cutting board for preparing ready-to-eat salad, or for preparing your ham, or you're cutting your pate without cleaning and disinfecting it again? I don't think anyone...
I think the thing is that what you would find is that on a sear and shave, that most chefs would probably use the red board if they use red for raw meat. They use the same equipment. And if that is in bad condition, or if it hasn't been sanitized or whatever, then you've got a problem. As I say, it's the technical knowledge of the staff who are dealing with it that's the risk. But by being on all these groups with all these thousands of chefs on there, the amount of sort of like disagreement with my position as a food safety person, you wouldn't believe some of the myths that abound out there. That that one chef will believe another, particularly with things like sous vide and pink pork and undercooked chicken and undercooked duck. I mean, duck is a very, very passionate, very I mean, I had one chef who I was talking to on one of the groups, and he said, "Well, yes, I agree with you, Steve. It can give people food poisoning, but I still eat it, even though I've given myself food poisoning 4 times on Campari. And you think, well, why do it? It's like sticking your hand in a bucket of red hot sand. You just wouldn't really think you should do it. But the trouble is, the consumers demand it, and the chefs agree with these sorts of things themselves, so they do it. Now, earlier in the year, in about January, the advisory board put a paper for the FSA saying that, we don't agree with the undercooking of raw meat or whatever. And there was one of the paragraphs which said something along the lines of, if a customer provides a waiver, then that's still what protects the chef who's cooking it. So in other words, you get the customer to sign a piece of paper to say they're quite happy with this. What the advisory group is saying is that person who gives the food poisoning, i.e. the chef, is still likely to face prosecution. Now, I don't know if that's still the case or whether the advice on that part of it's changed or not. So in other words, the chefs are being given this inconsistent advice, and they think they're safe when they're not. And that's the bit that really worries me. People are actively doing this.
I think you made a number of interesting points there. The one thing I would like to say is that the community of chefs you're talking to are engaged and interested and want to get it right. There are plenty of people out there who just want to get the orders over the counter and onto the table. The second thing, and there's a point I want to come back to there, but the second thing is about the new information for consumers, these notices that the FSA are suggesting that restaurants put up to say it's risky eating undercooked foods. I think that having the authority of the FSA behind such approved wordings actually gives the business a due diligence defense.
Yes.
And that's where the caveat emptor is coming in, and that's where the consumer is losing the protection of food safety law, and that shouldn't be the case.
No,
I just want to come back to an anecdote here, because an EHO I know in Scotland was on a walking tour, and she went into a hotel for her meal, and she ordered a burger. And this was in Scotland. She was delivered a burger, and it was pink on the inside. And she sent it back and said, look, this is completely unacceptable. And the chef came out and said, look, I moved up from England, and this is the way it's being done now down south. So I think the problem is it's the idea that the well-presented, well-cooked burger is actually undercooked is so widespread now that it's going to be very difficult to contain that and ensure that people are following even the very minimal guidelines from the FSA.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm trying to achieve on the Facebook groups, obviously it's a form of marketing for me as well, I don't deny that.
Yes, of course.
But one of the things that I am trying to do with these chefs is educate them. Now, it's not true that the ones that go on the chefs groups are on board with food safety and I'm somehow preaching to convert it. Quite the reverse. The chefs groups are usually set up to promote exchange ideas, recipes, anecdotes. I mean, some of them are quite crude. Some are better than others. And I get a mix of views. If I put something on about rare duck the other week, And one or two of the chefs said yes, and it should be cooked, and etc., etc. And others were saying, oh no, they threw their hands up in horror and said we shouldn't be having rare this, and we should be having rare this, that, and the other. And they got their information from their peers, they weren't listening to proper scientific evidence, or from people like yourself, or other environmental health officers who work with food, or people like myself, food safety trainers. I find the ones that come on my course, on my training, I usually manage to convince them that that's how it should be done. But there are still loads and loads and loads of chefs out there who are following, like sheep, what the herd mentality is doing by having all these new fads and fashions of undercooked food. And you're right, if the Food Standards Agency is somehow saying it's okay, then I'm afraid it's not doing anyone any favours, particularly the people who are consuming this.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And this is the problem with fads and fashions. And yes, I will agree that meat which hasn't been cooked very much at all is tender, is juicy, and is nice to eat. The whole point is it's not safe.
Yeah.
And when you've got an organism like E. coli 0157 out there, which is a killer, it's really not safe.
Might I interject?
Sorry, yes, David. I hadn't realised you were calling that.
Sorry, I wasn't available for the first part of the hangout, but tea and a very well-cooked burger was calling.
All right.
I got a simple question. I've been read all the guidance and listened to the back half of this, which is: do you think that the FSA guidance will actually make any difference to what's already happening in practice?
No. I think it will be led by the consumer and by the chefs themselves. The actual the point I've got is that if the FSA is rubber stamping it and taking that protection away from the public, as Patrick said, that's not good. I think they should still go and turn around and say, you must have something that is absolutely safe, a safe system of work that's accredited in some way. I don't mean by an awarding body, but something that is recognisable as being a safe method. And I think they will be far better off putting together some information, a leaflet, a fact sheet on how to do it properly, rather than leave it up to the individuals to think that they've got it done properly. Particularly when it comes, yes, you sear and shave and that meat's fine, or in theory it's fine, but then when they start putting it through a mincer or on a red meat chopping board that's not clean, that's when it comes. So I think that what we are getting is guidance. And it's sort of a little bit, I was teaching today level 3, and I turned around to them and asked them a question: what do you think about headwear and hairnets and whatever in a kitchen? Is it a legal requirement? And they turned around and said they weren't sure. I said, well, the legal requirement, the onus is on the person to stop hair falling into food and causing physical contamination of food, which is technically an offence. But it isn't a legal requirement for people to have hats. So, they never have been, under most legislation that I see, they're never prescripted on how you should do it, and all you end up with is maybe a code of practice on how to do it. And what I'm suggesting is possibly have some form of mini code of practice that is aimed at a chef. So a simple pocket card that can be laminated, or a sticker you can put on the wall, or something that they will take notice of. It's no good expecting to find it on the website. It needs to be handed out to them when people go around inspecting. So I don't know what your comments are, Patrick.
Well, you're talking about a simple fact sheet or a guidance sheet. Could I commend to you the very excellent bathblog.com, which is run by a couple of American food safety professors. And there's an information sheet there on contaminated ground beef, minced to us, and it's linked to E. coli 0157 risks. And that info sheet is designed for chefs, it's designed for people who are working in the industry, and it gives very clear guidance about thorough cooking with time-temperature combination. Unfortunately, it's in American, not Celsius, so it requires a little bit of translation. but we already have the ACMSF guidelines. That committee has already published a lot of guidance on safe cooking of beef burgers, and I think it's clear that if we are going to promote safe practice, we need to see organizations like my professional bodies, the CIH and REHIS, organizations like TIFSIP, organizations like the Institute of Food Science and Technology, actually saying, irrespective of the FSA advice, if you want to serve safe food, this is what you need to do, and put it in simple forms.
Yeah, as I say, I mean, I'm personally looking for the FSA to take the lead on this rather than relying on a third-party organisation, because they are the governing body for food safety, and with their
not
logo.
In Scotland, they're not. Not in
Scotland.
No,
not in Scotland.
And in Scotland, Food Standards Scotland have been very clear that they're not having any of this nonsense.
Yeah, no, I would agree. David?
Yeah, I got a bigger picture question, really. You know, I always have random questions. If you had to choose between exerting more control to prevent Campylobacter, which is 280,000 people a year as far as we know, or more control to prevent E. coli, an impossible either or, where would you put your money? Oh, that's got you quiet.
Yeah. I mean, Campylobacter, it can make people in high-risk groups, it can kill them or whatever, but generally speaking, it's an acute illness. Give people a couple of weeks and they're okay, right? And they're back in the land of the living. E. coli 157, once you're dead, you're dead. And, you know, I would look at the number of deaths caused by Campylobacter and the number of deaths caused by E. coli 157 or kidney failure, where there's a long-term residual effect, and I would use that to balance. Now, I don't know what the exact figures are without looking on the website.
No, I don't either, but the E. coli fatalities, obviously incredibly sad, but a large number of them are not attributable to foodborne illness.
Right, well...
No, I think I'm not saying we should have an answer about Campylobacter or, but I think we do have to have a balanced approach, and one of the easiest decisions to make, in my opinion, is to say, as Scotland Food Standards have, is we're not having any of this. You do not have undercooked burgers. Why? Because we've got to concentrate on the blooming chickens.
Yeah.
I think that's how I would find my way to it. I would object to the FSA's attempt to try and keep the industry happy, and I would say, not on, no need, your risk, we're not helping you out on that, but let's sort out the chicken thing, which everybody eats chicken.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would have thought most trainers would agree that they've, by sort of like doing these U-turns and all the rest, that they've not done themselves any favours, and most trainers would think that what they've done is not best practice.
Patrick,
what I'd like to add to that is that you're asking me to choose between a flea and a louse here, David.
Yeah.
I have no preference between them. There is a difference. With the Campylobacter is about systematic contamination of carcasses in the manufacturing chain.
Yeah.
However, the controls in the kitchen are exactly the same. It's destruction by heat. That's what you need to do to kill both Campylobacter and E. coli and Salmonella, etc., etc., etc. That is the control that the caterer can apply, and we need them to be doing that.
Yeah.
The other problem with E. coli controls is they're actually about high standards of hygiene throughout the slaughter and processing stages before meat gets to the consumer, to the kitchen. But if you get a super shedder coming into the chain, coming into the slaughterhouse, which actually these animals exist, they're rare, but they shed millions more bacteria than do other contaminated cattle, and the rate of contamination of meat could be extremely high, and that would overwhelm the defenses. And when you do that, then you're going to have casualties. And I don't want it to happen on my watch as an EHO that this happens. I've spoken to EHOs who were up before Sheriff Cox at the John Barr fatal accident inquiry. I do not want to be in that position.
No. Yeah, of course, 70% of chickens are carrying Campylobacter at some level. So you're right. They're different but similar in that there is a universal control, and the FSA is suggesting maybe that control might be relaxed in very special circumstances. Some could think it's the thin end of the wedge.
Certainly doesn't make my job any
no.
as a trainer, because I'm trying to sort of like tell people how to prepare food safely, and they're saying, well, the Food Standards Agency says, well, if I do it right, it's okay. But the thing is that most people on the shop floor, I mean, it was a similar sort of thing with the allergen, with the food information regs. The chefs sort of found out from each other on the groups, weren't particularly contacted by the local authorities for the simple reason the local authorities at that time hadn't had their training and were only putting limited resources out there to tell and inform people. So what I found in December and January was all these chefs panicking, absolutely panicking, not knowing what to do, because they don't necessarily have access to all the, we know where to look for the information. We go to the FSA, we go to various other CIH or wherever, various other resources that are readily available. But when you're working in a kitchen and you might not even have access to anything other than a smartphone, then where do you get the information from? So this is what I want to make information on things like safe preparation of undercooked burgers. I want that information to be readily available. Maybe the local environmental health teams having leaflets that they can give out when they go to do inspections or interventions, call them what you will.
Well, I just want to challenge you there, Steve, because I don't think there is such a thing as safe preparation of undercooked burgers.
Fine, I wouldn't want one myself, but there are some safer methods.
I'll concede that.
Provided that people have got the information, because otherwise I wouldn't be eating a medium rare steak or rare steak or whatever.
And of course you can distinguish between a piece of steak, and mincemeat where the surface has been minced together, so any surface bacteria are spread throughout the meat.
Yeah, no.
You would distinguish those.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, just looking at the clock, and we're sort of starting that. We're a little bit late starting, but we're starting to overrun. If you two guys have got 5 minutes to spend after this, there's a couple of things I want to run through.
Yes.
Surely.
Sorry, David?
Yes, I'm hanging on.
All right, okay. So it's good night from me. It's good night from Patrick. Patrick, you're on the screen there.
Good night. Lovely to speak to you.
And David.
Yes, good night.
Okay, then we'll call it a day. We're back next month. We haven't decided what we're going to be doing, but have a look at the website. Cheers. Bye.